and welcome back. So with the preferred show coming this weekend, I thought I'd give y'all a little behind the scenes of running a show. So just to give some little background information, if you did not know, I am a drag queen. And I am specifically talking about running drag shows. So if this is not your type of video, you might want to click off. If not, hey, welcome. You know, you learn something new every day. So I started doing drag 5 years ago, April 20th of 2018. I think that's the math. Question mark? Obviously, when you first start doing drag, you don't really have a cast position available for you. You kind of have to unfortunately work for it, unless you're a certain type of queen, which we won't mention those. But my first cast position was actually at the very first club that I ever performed at, which was Dope and Dance Club. This is actually where the preferred shows are at, which is crazy to think about. But that was actually my first cast position as well. I started performing there regularly, and eventually my ideas just grew so big to the point where they had to put me on stage officially. So yeah, that was my first ever cast position, was at DDC. I remember whenever I started to get more in depth into drag, a lot of more options came available to me, such as hosting, such as becoming a show director at that same exact place, which we'll get into later because it happened twice. But the hosting part was a first major high step for me besides the cast position. But the hosting is really what sparked light in me. I love talking. I love being on stage in front of people. So having the ability to host a drag show was like game changing for me. Just to really quickly kind of touch on the cast positions and, like, I guess you would say the titles and names of cast positions. So you start, it's unfortunately like a hierarchy. You have your like kittens slash your tip spots slash your just people who help out. Kitten and tit spot are two totally different things. Kitten is more so someone who comes and helps with the entertainer. Tit spot is someone who is just brought in just to entertain, with the only payment being tips. Cast members, usually depending on the club, you do get paid. Tit spots, usually you only get paid in tips. Besides those, you have your special guests, who are guests who usually come from out of town to a certain club, and obviously they get their own booking fee. Usually, if we're talking about the right club. That's already right there a huge misconception when it comes to drag, is that drag entertainers get paid well. That is not always true. Specifically if you live in the state of Alabama, and sometimes you don't get paid at all. I remember my first time getting paid in drag wasn't until about 2 or 3 years into drag. So do not expect money unless it's from tips right away, because it will not happen. When you start getting more into drag and you get those cast positions, that's usually where you will see payments in drag, unless you're being booked as a special guest, which, as mentioned, special guest, you travel around, you do your little 1-2, you show the crowd of that area what you got, and you move on to the next. Until I became a show director at my own shows, I was usually just a floating drag queen, which means I didn't have a cast position anywhere, and I was just taking special guest spots in shows, which is unfortunate, but you know, hey, it happens. And still to this day, not cast anywhere in Birmingham. And then other than that, you have your host, which is the host of the show. Sometimes people are booked specifically to be the host of a show. Sometimes people will host and perform. Really just depends on the show and the person. And then besides your host, you have your show director, who is in charge of everything. You will often have your show director, such as me, with my shows, be the host as well. Sometimes it's just easier and it gets things done. When it comes to gaining your first cast position, main thing that I recommend as a tip is to always be yourself. I know that's something that's super like oversaid, especially when it comes to drag, and specifically Drag Race. I feel like that's all they ever say to the queens. But it's very honest. Be yourself. I remember when I first started doing drag at DDC, I was doing very much so songs that I could not keep up to the rhythm with. Whenever I really realized that, you know, I'm just gonna be stupid and do whatever I want, that's when I got the offer to be on cast. So that's really the biggest tip I can say when it comes to wanting to be on cast somewhere, is just to be yourself. And if you look at it in certain perspectives, and if they don't want you on cast for being yourself, then that's their issue. My first time show directing was actually in 2020. It was during shows being held at the very first beginning of the pandemic. I was actually in Birmingham for college whenever the pandemic started, and I had to move back to my hometown of Ozark, which is where my home bar is. It was right before it officially hit the States, and I started taking over the shows, and I was there during the beginning of the pandemic, towards the end of the pandemic, and then I decided to move back to Birmingham. Main thing to note about being a show director, if that's something that you are trying to reach, it is very hard. It is extremely hard. We're gonna get obviously into the things that I do to prepare for my shows, but it's a lot. It usually takes me about a month to fully prepare for the show, and thankfully my shows are months in between, so it's perfect timing. But just note, it is very hard, and sometimes it is not always rewarding. So just keep that in mind. But if you set your dreams high and your expectations even higher, then ideally you can take anything and make it yours. So the very first start of my show, my current shows in Dothan at Dothan Dance Club, the preferred show, happened in November. I was actually performing in, it was either October or September at Dothan Dance Club, and I was asked by the owner, who I've always had a great connection with, which is another pro tip, always connect with the cast and the people, and specifically the owners of the bar and or place that you were performing at. He actually asked me how I would feel about coming back to do shows and producing my own shows, and through the talks and works of it, eventually it happened. Whenever this was actually brought to my attention, I immediately, it was like a no-brainer to me. The only thing that was an issue was the 3-hour distance between Birmingham and Dothan Dance Club. Whenever it comes to show directing, 3 main things that you have to kind of do is picking a show. Obviously, like, is your show going to be monthly? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be every other week? So on and so forth. Picking a cast and then running the show itself. When it comes to picking the show, as mentioned, you got to find a location, which is honestly the hardest part of getting your own shows. Finding a location in Birmingham literally took me almost 2 years, and it did not happen. So just note, if that is something you're looking to do, start immediately, because it is very hard. Next thing is obviously picking, like I mentioned, a time, whether it be monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, so on and so forth, but also a time of the show, whether it be a brunch, a matinee, a late night show, early show, so on and so forth. You also have to pick cover pay, if you're gonna pay your entertainers that way, or if you're gonna have a set amount from the revenue or the event place to give you that money. And then you're gonna pick a theme. It's, I'm telling you, a lot of work, and that's just in picking the show alone. And the next up obviously comes the cast. You gotta pick the cast. You gotta think, is it gonna be rotating? Is it gonna be a permanent cast? Are you gonna have special guests? Are you gonna have an inclusive cast, which is the main thing that you need to do when starting drag shows and drag events, is make sure to have an inclusive cast. That's something that is not very common here in Birmingham. So with my cast, it's definitely something I wanted to make sure of. And then also with that, you have to make a flyer. You gotta know how to put a flyer together. And if you don't know, you gotta have connections of those people who do know how to put a flyer together. And then eventually, once you have all those things lined up in a row and you get them all completed, it's time to run the show. You gotta promote the show. You got to do the music for the show. You gotta promote again. With all of those tips and tricks, I'm gonna kind of show you my process for running my own show and let you see where I'm currently at. As I am recording this, it is January 24th, which is 3 days now before I announce my next month's show. Which brings me to my first inside tea, which is promote in advance. That is a huge, big thing when it comes to shows. I always try to promote my shows at least 2 weeks before the actual show date. This gives me time to not only promote each individual cast member of the show, but also to reach everyone on social media about the show. As for casting the show, I do this multiple weeks, if not months, in advance before the actual show date. Just for an example, for this month's February show, I had the entire cast completely casted except for one member before the January show even happened. The way I do my casting for my show is a little bit different than the way other people do casting, just because, for a few reasons. One, the preferred show coordinates with my YouTube channel show, The Preferred Few, so therefore aligning special guest members for the show from the YouTube channel really is important for me. Secondly, probably the biggest thing is, as mentioned, this show is 3 hours away from where I currently live, so that is something that I do have to take in mind, as well as the other members. As mentioned, a lot of the guests who are Birmingham entertainers on my channel travel to Dothan, so I have to make sure that that is enough time planned to give those entertainers enough time to prepare. I personally do things for my show, not only just because it is a monthly show and I feel like separating each month with a different theme really helps keep the show itself fresh, but also I do it as a selfish way just to kind of push myself to do something different, but also to push the cast members as well. Sometimes the themes will coordinate to the cast selected, but usually it's to kind of portray every single side of drag, like, you know, your spooky drag, your pageant drag, your old school drag. I like to incorporate those types of themes into the show to kind of show all perspectives of drag. These themes as well are picked months in advance. This helps me kind of plan out the shows, kind of plan out what cast fits better with what show. And often these themes change due to cast members changing. Just as another example, all of my shows until April, if not May, already have a theme for them. So the theme is kind of like loosely planned out, and then a better idea will come to tuition with like a name and so on and so forth. When it comes to the process of the upcoming show in February, I specifically had the theme picked out all the way in December, and as mentioned, 90% of the cast already selected before the January show even happened. So let's see exactly in this process we are. So step 1 we have already completed, which is picking a theme. And although I had the main idea of Valentine's Day being a theme, I didn't want it to be basic. So taking inspiration from the runway category, actually from Drag Race, I thought Hard On would be a perfect description for this show. I then elaborated more so on the theme, picking out better details. I wanted to be like a mixture of heartbreak and horny, to be honest. And I thought that was perfect for the theme of Hard On. While creating all of the ideas, I start to create a teaser flyer, and I post these before I post the main flyer just to kind of give more people information about the show, as well as to let people know when the next show is happening. My shows always happen the second week of every month, so it is a set date. However, with scheduling, with, you know, things happening, sometimes dates change, so I do like to do a teaser just to be like, hey, when the cast is about to be announced, but also 2, let's not forget this is happening. So this teaser that was actually made for this show was made by Amber Valentine, actually, who just wanted to put her own little twist on it since it was her theme month, essentially. So this teaser in specific will be put out Friday the 26th because the show will be announced Friday the 27th, or Saturday the 27th. So this goes ahead and lets people know, hey, this show is still happening. This is the month's theme. And if you come back tomorrow, you get to meet the cast for it and you get to know more about the information of the show. So my next step is casting, and as mentioned, most of the cast has been already casted. Fun fact, Gina, who is in this show, was actually casted for the January show, but due to some mix-up of dates, she was actually pushed back to this show. And after Gina was officially casted from the move, I thought of my next entertainer, and I thought who perfect than the Queen of Valentine's Day herself, Amber Valentine. And when it comes to casting my shows, I usually like to maintain a small cast, and I usually like to have 2 Birmingham / out of town entertainers and 2 local entertainers, just to kind of keep it evenly spaced. However, a issue that I often run in with is the local entertainers of Dothan not wanting to come out. They are a little bit afraid and timid, but thankfully through Drag the Competition, which is actually every single Friday before the preferred show, I host this competition where I try to get as many local entertainers of Dothan to come out so that they can perform in the preferred show. And I quite literally make it simple to where if you do it, you get a spot in the show. And so this is kind of done to help me not only promote more drag, but also to gather more entertainers for the preferred show from the local area. So that being said, this month's cast was actually the very first to not have two local Dothan entertainers. With the small amount of entertainers that I have in Dothan, I kind of have a schedule of the rotating entertainers. So those include Deja Amour, Amber Xerxes, who is also my co-host for Dragged, Johnny Cyrus, and a few others. With some picking and some whispering in my ears, Florian, who was also in the Preferred show, quite literally begged me to be in another show right after their show ended in December. And with my rule in place, they could not do the January show, so it worked out perfectly for them to join us for the February hard-on. Now that the show is officially casted, this is when I start to create the group chat for the cast members to relay messages of what's going on with the show, information that they might need for the show, and time frames of what time they should be there and when they should have their music submitted. This leads me to my initial first message and my next step of creating the show, which is promoting. Whenever I create these groups of the cast members, I start with a very first initial message, which is actually copy and pasted every single time and just changed with the different details. But one thing that is made very prominent from the first message is to promote. Promote. Promoting the show, as mentioned, is one of the biggest tools when it comes to making sure that your show is growing and having some form of involvement. Not only do I like to go ahead and promote the show 2 weeks in advance, but I also like to go ahead and get my cast members for that show to start promoting their show. And I do this in a few different ways. I make individual flyers, which I was actually heavily inspired by the DIY shows in Birmingham. I feel like the way they promote their shows and just show off their cast in general is really incredible, and I definitely would recommend some other shows taking some advice from them. As this video is being recorded, my next step currently is to work on the individual flyers. So I do not have those done for this show. However, individual flyers are the easiest thing to do ever, especially if you have Canva. Canva makes it beyond easy, so definitely recommend. There's plenty of other tools that you can use for promoting your show. Some that I use include Facebook events, Instagram reminders, and short videos, such as the ones that I post all the time, promoting the shows, and the one that I post Friday, promoting the teaser for the show. They can all be used to help promote your shows. And please, if you don't take anything else from this video, please know promoting your shows is the biggest tool that you can use for your show. Point blank period. You can leave your wig at home, but if you don't promote the show, it's not gonna be worth it. Which brings me to my next step, which is setting up the actual show. So as mentioned, the group chat is created with music instructions on how entertainers can upload their music. And I personally set a deadline for the music, which is the day before the actual show. This creates a organization for me to make sure that all of the music is sent in, because I do set up these shows previously before the actual show. And there are a bunch of different ways that you can do music as a show director. A lot of like old school drag shows will do just the USB, where you show up with your music on a USB. To prevent a lot of the same music being played, and also just to prevent me from having an anxiety attack from OCD, I just like to have them submitted to me before. So much easier. I just download it, put it onto a USB, call it in. Once I have all of their music downloaded onto my computer and moved to the drive, I start to organize them, and I set it by the lineup of the show. And just to briefly touch up on that, lineup of the show is also something very important. You always want to make sure when casting your cast for the show, you want to have a diverse cast, but also when creating your lineup for that specific show, you want to make sure that they are placed correctly to where it evenly distributes all of the talent. Perfect example of this is you don't want to have someone who bucks and goes crazy more so in the middle, and just have someone who does slower barking barks in the beginning of the show. That really doesn't set you up for success. So knowing where to put your entertainers in the lineup is also something very, very helpful when creating your show. While creating the show lineup, 2 short, small presentations are used to help the show out. The first one being the entertainer's individual flyers, which are put into a presentation and presented as the entertainer is performing. This provides their social medias where you can tip them online, such as Venmo and Cash App, and so on and so forth. Also, it usually involves If they've been on the preferred view, it will have a little picture of the thumbnail from that video as well. And then the second one being a 10-minute pre-show. This is something that I started doing recently actually with the January show, and I thought it was genuinely I did it, loved it, thought it was a great idea. And we're gonna get into that just here in a little bit of more so what my pre-show is, but I put this in just to kind of help as a spacer and to get everyone ready for the show. After putting everything together and staying organized, everything in the show should work out perfectly for the show to be incredible. The only issue you should face is the worst issue of all, which is drag queen time. Let it be known, drag queen time is a real thing. Most drag queens are running 10 minutes late at best, if not more. And I'm personally not about that. I grew up with shows that was constantly running late, hated it, hated getting out at like 4 o'clock in the morning, not a fan. And when I came into Birmingham, something that I saw a huge difference in was Owls on 7th. The owner, Mark Cummings, actually has a very strict policy about starting the shows on time. Once it hits 11 o'clock, he will be on the microphone, and I am very inspired by that. I was like, we're definitely gonna set very strict timelines. I immediately kind of make this known when I start the group chat. I break down a time frame for them and time requirements for them to be upstairs, which is usually by 10:45. So I'm not too bad about it. If you're upstairs by 10:45 and fully dressed by 11, then you're okay in my books. All of my shows start exactly at 11. I will be dressed and ready downstairs by 11 o'clock with the microphone. I will go ahead and announce the show, tell them what is to be expected to come in the show, and then I will announce that a pre-show is about to happen, which is where this pre-show comes in. This is a 10-minute clip, and it features several different teasers of projects that I have, such as the Preferred Few, Drag the Competition, the Preferred Podcast, so on and so forth. And I also include videos of the past show just to kind of hype them up, as well as the entertainers that they're about to see on stage. This is done for a few reasons. Obviously to promote myself even more, because if you're not promoting yourself, you're not doing the job right. But the other reason is to give the entertainers an extra 10 minutes to fully get ready. I'm not gonna lie, I like to scare them a little bit, thinking that the show is gonna start exactly at 11 whenever I'm heading downstairs. And it does start at 11, but they think that I'm about to start announcing them when little do they know they have 10 extra minutes. So this is just a little breather for them and also for myself to get changed, to get dressed for the next show. When it comes to me hosting the show, because I am the host of my own show, one of my biggest drag pet peeves is hosts who talk on the microphone for way too long. It is not what I'm about. But also in counter perspective, a lot of pet peeves that people have with hosts is hosts who are not on stage all the time, and I'm one of those hosts. I am not on stage all the time. In my opinion, that is pointless. It helps me prevent talking too much on stage, but also it allows me to get dressed upstairs. It allows me to view the other entertainers to make sure they're ready before they're called out on stage, and so on and so forth. Once the pre-show is started, I head back upstairs, and the guests and crowd do not see me until my number is on. And then once my number is done, I will obviously announce that there is another show. I will tell people to go get a drink, have some fun at the bar, have some fun on stage, dancing, and then I will tell them that we will be back in 10 minutes with another show. Main thing you want to do when it comes to closing out individual shows is to always tell the guests to visit their bar. This is really going to help your money flow better, as well as the club as a whole, because you never want to see your club sink, or else you're not going to have a club to perform at. Yeah. When it comes to the amount of shows that you have in an actual show, that really just depends on the place. For my shows, we have 3 individual shows, so in between, I always put myself last for each individual show. In between, I make sure that they are always going to the bar, dancing on the stage, making sure they're having a good old time, because the more they drink, the prettier we look. So gotta make sure that happens. When it comes to the final number, the 3rd show, I will stay on stage for the remainder of the night, just to make sure that everyone is known that they are very welcomed in the environment, and we are very thankful that they came. and also to do our outro for the show. Another tip that I strongly recommend is having a specific intro and outro for your shows. This helps guests realize that the show is about to start or the show is now over. And specifically for my shows at DDC, we have a patio area where guests can go outside and smoke. So having a specific intro, which I'll play the intro here. Welcome to The Preferred Show at the one and only Dope and Dance Club. Get your drinks and your tips because the show is about to start in... Now let's welcome to the stage your monthly host, Sajay Preferred. Having that specific intro really helps the guests acknowledge that, hey, the show's about to begin, so we need to put the cigarette out and come inside. But of course, however you do this is totally up to you. So after we've repeated shows for 3 times in a row, we finally do our callback, which I played my outro music, which just to put it out there, mine is the Golden Girls theme song. And this is where I have all of the entertainers do callbacks on stage. I will call their name and they will walk, present themselves, stay on stage to do final photos of anyone in the guest, and just to have a good time before we call it a night. And finally, before we take off our makeup and call it an official drag night, we always do a little video of where we walk in the stage in the cast order, and we just serve major on film. This is done obviously to promote the show, go figure, but it's also just done just to show that we have a good time. It's very fun. Through all the steps, blood, sweat, and tears, the show is created. As you could probably tell, being a show director, and as mentioned, is very hard work, but through all of your hard work and dedication, even my hard work and dedication, it really does pay off. I genuinely love being a show director. I love having the creative range to do anything that I want with my shows and being able to cast all of this amazing local drag. And whether you came to officially see how to start a show or you just accidentally clicked on this video and saw a drag queen in a red dress, hey, glad to have you here. And if you came just for the behind the scenes stuff, I love the behind the scenes stuff, so we're on the same page. Make sure to come out to Dope and Dance Club February 10th for the next The Preferred Show, Heart On, with your cast this month being Gina, Amber Valentine, Florian, Johnny Cyrus, and me as your host. And make sure to come to every single The Preferred Show the second Saturday of every month. And who knows, maybe you'll see a little bit more behind the scenes tea of the actual shows. I've always had the idea of recording like the dressing room during the show and showing you like how drag queens talk and spill tea. So if y'all would like that as a video, let me know in the comments. Tell me how you feel about it. Tell me what you would like to see behind the scenes or behind the scenes related. I've kind of recently been loving getting into the behind the scenes, specifically of the Preferred Few, especially when I did my drag room tour. I was like, I love this. So if you would like to see more, please make sure to let me know in the comment. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for a brand new video every Sunday. You can also find brand new videos of the Preferred podcast here on the YouTube, or you can find that on Spotify at The Only Preferred. Make sure to follow me on all of my socials at The Only Preferred, which includes Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and Threads, just new, brand new. With that being said, and you knowing all of my secrets, it's time to end this video. So make sure to stay queer and always stay preferred.